This is the Barbell Therapy and Performance Podcast, where traditional healthcare is redefined to help listeners achieve peak performance, accelerate recovery, and elevate overall health. Hosted by Dr. Brett Scott, a doctor of physical therapy and national strength coach, this podcast explores the worlds of fitness, alternative medicine, and holistic health. Each episode uncovers innovative strategies and practical solutions for those seeking to enhance their quality of life when conventional methods fall short. It is our firm belief that every living thing has potential, and it is our mission to help you find that potential.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brett Scott. With me here today is my friend Jason Brown. Jason is considered the king of programming. If you go online, you can find a lot of his content. He has a lot of great content out there. He does a lot with program reviews. He's a strength coach himself and an athlete. He's an author. He's a well-known speaker. He speaks at all kinds of strength and conditioning events around the country. If you're familiar with Train Heroic and all the coaches on there, out of 10,000, this dude's in the top 10. And he's also getting his PhD in kinesiology, correct?
Yes, kinesiology with an emphasis in exercise science.
Yeah, so me and Jason have been friends for a while now, and we've done some work together, and I wanted to get him on the podcast because every time we get together, we have these very intelligent conversations about programming, program design, theory, all this. So I wanted to get more into this for people to learn a little bit more about it and what they can take of it to, help better design their own programs and reach their goals. So one of the big things I want to talk to you today is as we've spoken about before, you're a big fan of conjugate programming. Mm-hmm. And so just for starters, how would you define the conjugate training system?
Well, I think, first of all, we got to kind of unpack it a little bit and go back in time. I think anyone has heard of the conjugate method, probably from Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell. And conjugate by definition means multiple things joined together. But back when Louis discovered the system and started reading books like Super Training and delving into a lot of the old Russian manuals, it was joining together essentially kind of a sequence of different qualities of fitness. So a simplistic view would be training multiple qualities of fitness within the same week. All right. So, for anyone listening, that's like training power development and maximal strength within the same cycle, as opposed to a linear based cycle where you potentially focus on one quality for a certain length of time. And, during that time, there are certainly things that happen. There are trade-offs. But by definition, conjugate is more of a combination or more of a concurrent style training where you are working on multiple qualities of fitness simultaneously.
And how does conjugate differ from Westside too? Because there's a lot of similarity, but there's some differences too. So how would you differentiate the two? Yeah,
so I would think that, really the probably the easiest way to understand that is it can be tailored to anyone's needs or anyone's goals. So it was popularized for powerlifters and even, strength athletes. They did a lot with strength athletes, but more so for powerlifters and their reputation of hitting just some ridiculous totals with powerlifters precedes them. But I think that one of the things that's not as well known about the conjugate system is that you can really design that training plan to align with a lot of different goals. And the way I use it is more for longevity. Longevity isn't a super sexy training modality, but most people, every time I poll my email list or I poll, we actually just did one on YouTube, I invariably get back the same response with someone's main goal and it's longevity. So using conjugate for longevity, I think for some people that maybe they don't have any frame of reference with it, they might think, well, it's probably just for powerlifters that are looking to improve maximal strength and improve their squat, bench, and deadlift. There's a lot more to it than just that. And I think it can be really biased towards any one quality. If you wanted to bias it towards strength and powerlifting, obviously you can. If you want to bias it towards Olympic lifters, you can. If you want to bias it toward a tactical athlete, you can. I mean, you could go down the list of different specialties and you could literally bias it to any one of those by simply plugging and playing different methods and maybe organizing in a little bit different fashion than you would if your goal was just, let's say, maximal strength.
Yeah. And so is that, I mean, my next kind of question was going to be like, what makes you such a big fan of it? But I think that kind of tells you the story of that.
Well, yeah. So let me give you guys a little bit of background. I think it probably makes sense to give a little bit of story to this. So I got introduced to the Conjugate system when I was a young athlete. Just for reference, I'm 41 years old. So I've been training and coaching for a really long time. I still feel like I'm a young dude, but needless to say, it's been a long time where I've been doing this stuff and being in the trenches. And I got exposed to the Conjugate system at the facility I was training at as a young athlete. And I was really lucky to have some really great coaches that knew what they were doing, and they had extensive backgrounds themselves. But the mainstay in the training that I was subjected to was conjugate style for athletes. I was a football and track and field athlete. We had hockey players. We had a lot of people that played professional sports, and it was used specifically for all of those people, and everyone had their own individual program. So my initial experience in the strength and conditioning world was to the Conjugate system. I didn't know as much then about the origin of it and how it kind of arrived at Westside Barbell. But needless to say, there was a lot of things I learned during that time. Now, after I moved away from training at this facility where I was later an intern at, I started using a lot of different styles of training, like linear periodization and undulating periodization and different methods and different cycles. And, I told you I've trained Olympic lifting extensively. I trained with the Russian guys in Norwood. I've done a lot of different styles of training, and, kind of the thing that led me back to Conjugate was using all these different styles of training and not really hitting my peak, not really feeling like I am getting the most from it, or I'm able to, to see the progression. And once I went back to Conjugate training exclusively, which was, kind of around like 2013, 2014, I started hitting PRs on all my Olympic lifts. My snatch and clean and jerk, I hit lifetime PRs. I hit a lifetime PR on my power clean at 330 pounds within 8 weeks of being back on the Conjugate system. So, and not only that, I think the kind of more telling piece was that I wasn't as beat up, and I certainly wasn't training nearly the same amount of volume that I was doing with a lot of the linear based stuff. So that journey, the kind of pathway to, going through different things, being my own guinea pig, experiencing a lot of different styles of training was, in the end, was the thing that kind of led me back to, Conjugate for me is like my high school sweetheart. It's like we go out in college, you try to you date, you meet other people, and you try to see if the grass is greener. And lo and behold, a lot of times the grass isn't greener. Conjugate for me is this high school sweetheart. And it is such an incredibly versatile style of training where you can effectively improve multiple qualities of fitness, but you can also recover better. You can also train the aerobic system. You can also manage stress a little bit more effectively than you would if you were just training again for one quality. So there are a lot of things to it, when you kind of break it down. But I think that all of those things are great, but the ability to stay engaged, the ability to be compliant with that training because it's fun, there's a lot of novelty and a lot of things that are dissimilar. So it allows you to not be just lifting all the time. You do conditioning as a mainstay in that style of training is what makes it what it is, and the reason why that I've gone down that rabbit hole with training modalities and have found myself back basically at the beginning.
And so you've been training in this modality for almost 10 years again now, consistently, and still making progress with it. Because I think that's something that's something I've seen with people that believe in conjugates. Like that's their lifestyle. Where a lot of other people, they'll jump from different coaches, different systems, different methodologies, maybe a year or 2 years or so. And it's like, okay, like they kind of hit a plateau where it seems like Conjugate is something that for whatever reason, you don't hit these plateaus.
Mm-mm. Yeah. So the funny part about this whole thing is that I was using this style of training at a CrossFit gym. I owned a CrossFit gym for 5 years. And during that time, I had a lot of people interested in what we were doing for programming. And I don't actually, Brett, I don't know if I've told you this, but I started a business where I delivered programming to other CrossFit gyms. And it grew very fast, just organically. Within 2 years, I was working with 250 gyms and delivering a conjugate style of group programming, in the guise of CrossFit, if you will. It was more conjugate CrossFit if we want to really get down to what it actually was. And during that time, that business grew extensively, largely because of the results people were getting, but also because, people were able to stay recovered and stay compliant and stay motivated. So there's a lot of other factors that when we just look at kind of the physiology of how this stuff works and how these certain pieces blend together, there's a lot of things that come into the fold that might not, if you were just doing high intensity training all the time, you might have some level of central fatigue where, you eventually get to a point where you're not motivated to train. People are like, oh, I just don't like that training anymore. Well, maybe you don't like the training, or maybe you're overtraining, and maybe there's just some mental burnout that you don't want to do that anymore. So that was kind of my initial, turning point where I went in the online space and I started delivering this to the masses. We had 20,000 people a day, 27,000 people a day using the training.
Well,
so 250 gyms, the industry standard is about 110 people membership per gym. So a lot of people using the training, a lot of different data points. And, you learn a lot in that process when you have that many people using your training. There's certainly things that I would do probably a little bit different now, but I think overall, the combination of developing strength and developing the aerobic system were just two bulletproof aspects of that system that made it very hard to beat and made it, have people arrive at the desired end state, the place that they want to be as far as the results are concerned.
Yeah. So can you break what the system looks like down a little bit more into something that people can understand?
Sure.
As far as what are the principles of it, how it's laid out, what are the goals, etc.
Yeah, so I'll give you guys kind of my rundown of how we do this now. It has changed in terms of how much of certain things we do and what methods we lean on. Those things have changed, but the overall tenets of it, the overall kind of core value of it is still the same. And really the main piece of this puzzle is GPP, general physical preparedness, building your base of fitness. It's like building a house. You build a house, you build a solid foundation first. GPP is your foundation. It's your ability to have work capacity. It's your ability to recover between exercises, between sessions. And the aerobic system is an integral part of that. The aerobic system for people is literally everything. So if you don't have an intact aerobic system, you don't have the same ability to recover from hard training. You don't have the ability to handle stress the way someone that has, a well-developed aerobic system would. So physiologically, there's just a lot of huge benefits that can't be replaced by lifting weights faster or doing mixed modality style training where, again, this whole mindset of, well, I don't need to do cardio because I'll just lift weights faster. Well, lifting weights faster is a form of conditioning, but it's not the same as aerobic conditioning. When you lift weights, there's isometric contractions. You drive blood pressure up. That blunts the same amount of cardiac output that you would have if you just did cardio, steady state on a cyclical piece. So there's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration when you're delivering conditioning or strength training. There are certain pieces that go with that as far as the fundamentals that need to be intact. So for me, the number one piece of this system is the aerobic system. Without that, you don't have a foundation. So we spend time developing that within this plan. And within this plan, you have dedicated days to strength training and accessory work. You have dedicated days to power development. You have dedicated days to the aerobic system. And that breaks down in a system, where we do 3 full body training sessions for strength and hypertrophy work. We do 2 to 3 aerobic sessions, totaling anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours per week of zone 2. So zone 2 would be 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. And it's done with very specific measures so we can ensure that people are going to get what we want them to get from it. Lifting weights faster is not going to improve your aerobic system. It'll improve your strength endurance, but it's not going to improve your aerobic system. So there are, again, certain things physiologically that need to be in place for that to happen. But when all of those things work together and there's a synergy there, it allows people to go into the next session and be recovered and be able to put the high level of intensity. Their strength sessions, they're able to put it in a high level of intensity being, close to failure, 1 to 2 reps in the tank with maybe a big lift. And that is something that, again, is an integral part of that. And without it, you're not able to go into those sessions as fresh and with the same level of intensity that you would have, had you, not prioritized your conditioning. So, kind of like a template breakdown would be Monday would be a full body strength session. Tuesday would be more of a steady state mixed aerobic where we can mix in a few other things just to keep it interesting. But the core of it's going to be done more cyclically. Wednesday would look kind of like Monday, but different variations. Again, more strength and hypertrophy emphasis. And then Friday would be more of a full body power development where we do some explosive strength work. We might do some speed strength work. And then, of course, we train the other foundational movement patterns that weren't hit for that day. And then Saturday is usually, kind of an optional day. I see most people, kind of the sweet spot for most people that use my training is 4 days a week. And, if they can get a fifth day, it's kind of a bonus. I do have some people that they'll train 6 days per week pretty consistently, but I think kind of the greatest good for the greatest number is being able to get in, 4 to 5 sessions per week and leave it at that.
Yeah. And so a lot of people don't seem to understand this or don't want to understand this. Why is aerobic conditioning so important to getting stronger?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the aerobic system is really the gateway for a lot of things. And I think that, when I was coming up in the strength and conditioning world, there was a lot that wasn't known, number one. But number two, people thought that if you did anything for longer than 3 minutes, you were going to get slow, fat, and weak. And, that's not remotely true. And even looking at research, it's funny, a lot of the research that I've read present day confirm things that we were already doing a decade ago. But obviously, the world has gone more towards research, and I want to see your study. And well, guess what? The studies do exist, and I'm reading them. So it's obviously good to have. Did you have something?
Well, I was going to say, when I was in school over 10 years ago now, doing my undergrad, high intensity interval training was the thing, right? Mm-hmm. You had to do high intensity interval training. Zone 2 was deemed, everyone before that, it was that fat burning zone on the treadmill is garbage. Don't do it because you're not burning what we think in EPOC and all this. And now within the past years, it's zone 2 is huge.
It's definitely gained some popularity for sure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about why it's so important.
Yeah. So I think that, again, there's a right way and a wrong way. And I think that, the high intensity, it was always positioned in a way that you could get the same amount and half the time. And I wish that was true, to be honest. I don't like doing steady state cardio. I break mine up into 5 sessions. So I do 20 minutes, 6 days a week, and I get 120 minutes a week. That's a very palatable way. And there are other ways to make it more palatable, but just to save you guys the suspense, it's not sexy. It's definitely not going to get you likes on social media. It's not hard. And that's kind of one of the challenges, is that people that are very type A, they think it's too easy to be doing anything. And in reality, that's when we have a lot of the magic that happens. And the magic that happens is, we're able to improve things like cardiac output, which is in essence a product of stroke volume and heart rate. So the amount of blood we can pump in a minute to extremities. That's an aspect of work capacity. VO2 max is highly correlated to how long you live. You guys don't have to take my word for that. You can go read a billion studies. I mean, people know that if you have a higher VO2 max, chances are you have a better ability to tolerate stress. You have a better ability to downregulate inflammation. It's funny, I read a study recently about centenarians and looking at people that are 100 years of age or older, looking at kind of some of the biomarkers of these people and why are they living to 100 years of age or older. And a key
walking hills,
a key metric, what's that?
They're walking hills all day, probably.
They're walking hills all day, and they have a great VO2 max. They have, mitochondria in terms of just being able to downregulate inflammation. And there's, physiologically, there's a lot more to it that could be its own topic. But, to break it down kind of in a very simplistic way would be they have less inflammation than most people. The VO2 max is obviously related to heart health. And, again, why do people die of old age? I mean, the heart is largely responsible for a lot of issues. So these are things that we know to be true. And of course, I don't think anyone's going to argue against wanting to live longer. But the here and now, the what's in it for me right now is you can recover better between your sessions. And I see people will push their training sessions really hard, but they don't put the same emphasis on their recovery as they do their training. And I'm sure, Brett, you see this, right? You're a PT, you're telling someone, hey, you got to do this, to fix this lower back issue, we got to do this between these sessions, or we got to avoid this. And, I think that sometimes the easy solution is not often the solution that people want. They want kind of the harder thing. And again, high intensity interval training is a great example, because people thought you could do the same amount of work in less time. But unfortunately, the adaptations of the heart do take longer. Longer than, doing an 10 to 10 minute session. You need to go for steady states, for a longer duration that's sustainable, where blood pressure is low, where we can improve things like cardiac output, where we can, have more what we call in the heart is eccentric hypertrophy. So more cavity volume. We create more stretching in the left ventricle of the heart. Now, if you think about weightlifting, it does the opposite. It creates more thickening of cardiac tissue. So if you look at an ultrasound of the heart of like a weightlifter versus an aerobic or an endurance athlete, you have one that has a lot more volume and one that has, a lot more compact and a lot thicker tissue. Now, I'm not saying that weightlifting is bad for the heart, but what I'm saying is that if you only do one, you are missing the other. Mm-hmm. So you got to do both. And I know, again, it's not fun and it's boring, but it all comes down to kind of being that bridge for your other work. It's lower intensity. So it's lower impact on the nervous system. It's going to build work capacity. You're going to feel better. You're going to go into your next session more motivated. And then physiologically, we think about blood flow. If we think about, again, all the things I mentioned, just the downstream effects of doing this stuff. The list is so long that, again, it could be its own podcast. Yeah. So overall, like, again, for the people that are listening, it would be, you're going to recover better. You're going to feel better. You'll probably be able to go into that session with less soreness and a higher ability to be able to push the stuff that you are doing. And on top of that too, you're probably going to show up better for your kids or outside of the gym. You're going to live longer. I always tell people, like, I want you to be here for your grandkids. We got to do some cardio to do that. We can't just negate the cardio and just focus on lifting weights or focus on just your transformation, your before and after picture. There's more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say too, from a physical therapy perspective, when I get these power lifters or weightlifters that are, they're not training anything more than 5 reps at a time, and, they might sandbag through some accessory work. God forbid we give them single leg work. Physiologically, when you're only working anaerobically, I've seen it anecdotally at least, that the tissue gets stale. It's like, it's not getting oxygen, it's not getting nutrition, where I put these guys on, like a steady state cardio plan, whether it be just a walking program or you get on the bike 20 minutes, start warming up before your sessions. And we can see major changes in physiology and movement just because we're getting this new stimulus of nutrition, hydration to the tissue and everything else. And it makes such a big difference. And I've noticed that in my own training as well, of if I'm not doing cardio, I'm only lifting heavy, like my body feels like a stale old piece of bread real fast.
Totally. Honestly, I think for me, the aerobic system was the area of low hanging fruit I didn't know about back when I started to integrate this stuff in with the Conjugate system. It was the thing that totally revolutionized the way we train, and people started getting better results. Personally, I was experimenting on this with myself. I was doing a lot more zone 2 work. I was tracking my heart rate variability score. And interestingly enough, I used to compete in CrossFit, and then I went back and did the CrossFit Open 2 years after stopping CrossFit. This is like in 2018. I did the best in the CrossFit Open I had ever done. In prior years, we were very close to making regionals. We were usually within a spot as a team making regionals, my gym. And the year I went back and just did the CrossFit Open on a whim, it was actually right after we had I had my second child. So I was planning on not doing it just because I, wasn't sleeping and all those things that come with a newborn. And I ended up placing in the top 50, again, the best I've ever placed. And I had been training substantially less. So 5 hours total per week versus 10 when I was training to compete in CrossFit.
Yeah.
10 hours per week. And I got the best results I'd ever got in the CrossFit Open with training half the amount of time, but prioritizing more zone 2.
Yeah.
And I left every workout feeling like I had a lot more in the tank. And actually, it's funny, like my aerobic system was always a weakness for me. But back then I just didn't really know what it meant to develop it or how to stay compliant with doing steady state work for longer stretches of time.
Yeah. So I listened to one of your other podcasts before. I think it was with Ryan DeBell, the Movement Fix. Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned though,
that's old. That's an old one.
Yeah. I think you mentioned on there that your zone 2 sessions needed to be at least 30 minutes. But times
30 minutes is a good place for most people. You can get into a pretty good consistency with managing your heart rate. And of course, if it's done cyclically, cyclically would be aerobic, the treadmill, Stairmaster, elliptical, whatever you have access to for cardio equipment. And even, for those people that you mentioned, those powerlifters, walking might be a good fit. They might get them into zone 2 if they're really deconditioned. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on the individual and what your level of conditioning is. You might be able to use walking. Walking for most, probably not going to get you to zone 2, but for some people it certainly can. It can be kind of the regression to get them to maybe doing some more steady state. And it doesn't have to be jogging or anything with high impact. It can be relatively low impact stuff.
Yeah.
But 30 minutes for most is pretty.
But you do 20 minutes, you just said.
I do 20 minutes, but I do it's spread out over 6 days. Okay. So 6 days per week of 20 minutes. And this is kind of something that's a little bit newer is that I've been experimenting with is more frequency. And I've heard from a variety of pretty credible sources that frequency trumps, so 2 hours spread out over 6 sessions versus 2 hours. I used to do 2 hours in 2 sessions, so an hour each.
Ugh.
Yeah, exactly that. That's the response. So this is something I've been experimenting with, and it's still new. I've only been, this is only actually my first full week of doing it this style. So I'm still curious to see if it plays out, but I am tracking my HRV and obviously my resting heart rate. So I'm going to have, some pretty good data points to know whether or not it is working. But I will say already, I do feel more energy. I do feel better. And again, it's 20 minutes steady state.
Yeah.
As long as anything over 3 minutes for anyone listening is aerobic. So if you're doing something for 3 minutes straight, it's aerobic. You do something for longer than that, it's aerobic. It's going to rely on aerobic metabolism. And that's just by virtue of how it breaks down. But, so, if you're not doing any and you do 20 minutes, is that going to move the needle? Maybe. Yes. Like, what's the minimum effective dose? It's like training for hypertrophy. If you start with 20 sets, where do you go from there? Are you going to do 30 sets? Are you going to do 40 sets? I hope no one's doing 40 sets. Yeah. But, if you are, it's probably not high quality. And I think that, starting with a minimum effective dose is a great place to begin.
And so is there a certain minimum effective dose of weekly duration we should be getting of that zone 2? I think you mentioned it already, actually.
Yeah. Again, it depends. If you're doing nothing, then something is better than nothing. So I think that's kind of, if you're doing 0, doing 30 minutes a week might help you feel better. Now, the question is for how long and at what point do you need to go to, say, 60 minutes? So I think that is, obviously, there's individual set points for that to consider. A lot of people say 3 hours a week is the sweet spot for zone 2. Now, 3 hours a week is a big commitment for anyone. And now for someone like you, Brett, I know you love lifting. 3 hours would be a big ask. I wouldn't ask that of you. If I was coaching, I wouldn't ask that of you. I would ask we'd start probably around 60 to 90 minutes total per week. And I break it up. And then, of course, if you have someone that's an endurance athlete, like 3 hours a week is nothing for them. They'll do 4 or 5 hours a week, no problem. Now, there are some things to take into consideration as far as is optimal. And what I've seen with some of the peer-reviewed research is that if you are doing too much of this, then you can certainly start to bleed into strength and hypertrophy gains. So what I have seen and what some of the research has told me that around 2 to 3 hours a week is a good place to be in zone 2. Now, how far you go depends on you. I'm still trying to make 2 work, but I will be honest, I haven't seen much improvement in my HRV or resting heart rate, and I've been doing 2 hours total per week for a while now. So I'm trying the frequency to see if I can get that to move. But then, you have other people, like I have people that use my training that have a resting heart rate in the 40s. Do they need to do 3 hours a week? Probably not. Like, you could probably get away with a lot less because they're already very well conditioned. Their aerobic system is very good. Some of those folks can get away with doing 2 45-minute sessions per week, and that's more than enough for them. Yeah. So I think the short answer is that it's very individual.
Yeah. I was recently to do half-hour sessions of zone 2. And it was just like, I was trying to do it after training. I was like, this sucks. And I was like, I don't know. One day I just woke up a little early. I was like, you know what? I'm going to hit the bike. I had 20 minutes. I was like, 20 minutes wasn't bad. Way more palatable than 30 for whatever reason. And I just started, getting up, and I do 20 minutes on the bike every day in the morning. And I have ADHD too. So it sets my brain up. So I'm more focused through the day. I have more sustained energy. I'm not as all over the place. It really has helped me mentally more than anything. So is there any difference too if you're breaking that cardio up away from your strength training portion of things? Yeah,
it's a good one. Good question. So there is research on the interference effect. For anyone that doesn't know, the interference effect is essentially where you get to a point where different qualities of fitness, they start bleeding into each other. So, the big issue with endurance work was this being kind of scared that it's going to take away from your strength and your hypertrophy gains. And that could be the case. I trained a marathoner last year. Was it last year or the year before? I think it was the year before, actually. And I had her doing full body strength sessions, and she was doing a lot of road work. I mean, a lot more than any of us are ever probably going to do. But we were still making gains with strength, and she was even doing a DEXA scan and getting her lean tissue measured. We made considerable progress, even with an amount of road work that none of us are going to be able to do. So I think that's interesting too. But I think that n equals 1, probably not. I mean, she might be an outlier. Who knows? So I think separating it is an ideal thing. You've got very dissimilar modes of training. You've got one that trains, strength training is more anaerobic by nature, and obviously aerobic is aerobic. It's longer, it's more steady state, and it relies on different pathways and different fuel sources, different substrates. So separating them, to me, makes a lot of sense. A lot of the research says that if you do separate them, you get more. And if you do them in the same day, 3 to 4 hours is enough to keep them separate. But if you're going to do an Olympic lifting session where you do your snatch, your clean and jerk, and maybe some accessory or assistance stuff for those lifts, and then you do a 5K run, they are going to interfere with each other. I mean, there's really no way around it. You are talking about different fuel sources and just a different thing altogether. And the question you asked too is, does one bleed into the other? So if I do a 5K, you did a 5K run before you did a clean and jerk session or a snatch session, I mean, again, you don't need a degree to understand that those two things are not going to communicate well. However, if you have 3 or 4 hours, you have maybe a meal between them, then you could certainly do them in the same day and make great progress. I see most high-level CrossFit athletes, they're separating these sessions. And I think that the ones that aren't, maybe they just don't know better yet, or maybe they're trying to train too much for the specificity of the CrossFit games. But having that be the way you train, where you do, again, strength session and a conditioning session on the same day, or the same session rather, is doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think that there are better ways.
Now, what about for, us average Joes that are just trying to get to the gym, get a little bit of fitness? Would you say it's more beneficial to do your strength and your cardio together if it's, a 20-minute steady state thing, or you better off not doing the cardio at all that day?
So what I think is that most people are using the wrong training split, and it doesn't give them the freedom to have a cardio day and a lifting day. And I think that that's probably the best place to start. Now, with people with the right training split, you need to evaluate what's the most you can commit. So like Brett, you say like, all right, I want to train 4 days a week. Okay, well, 4 days a week is only 4 days a week. So we have to manage both of those styles of training within those 4 days. So that would mean to me that we need to use probably a full body style split where we hit all of your foundational movement patterns and we hit your aerobic work on the other days. Now, maybe for the first 8 to 12 weeks, we bias more strength training. So we do 3 days of full body strength and 1 day of aerobic. And then maybe for the next cycle, we do bias more aerobic. Maybe you're stressed out. Maybe it's a stressed out time of the year for you. Maybe we do 3 aerobic sessions and 1 lifting, which would you probably would hate that. But I think most people probably would. But then maybe for the rest of the year, we do a balance. We do 2 strength and we do 2 aerobic. Mm-hmm. So we have kind of a nice balance. Obviously, there's something to be said about the novelty of that. You're not always just doing the same style. There's kind of, some novelty in terms of keeping people engaged. But I think that, most people are using a style of training that doesn't have room for it within their schedule. And it always gets left out. It's like, I'll do it when I have time. And then if you don't have time, no one has extra time. So they don't do it. And I see this with coaches too. A lot of online coaches, they prescribe like optional cardio. People don't do optional. Like it's got to be in the program. If
people don't even do it when it's mandatory half the time.
Exactly.
My weightlifters are very, they fight with me about doing any type of cardio. And I'm like, look, like you just finished a competition. We're in a GPP phase. Like building an aerobic base is fucking important. Let's do that. It's 10 minutes. I'm like, well, yeah, please.
I mean, they can just walk on an inclined treadmill. It's funny, a friend and colleague of mine who is an elite level powerlifter, the best he ever competed in powerlifting was when his resting heart rate was the lowest, and he was doing 20 minutes of incline treadmill walking 5 days a week for like 20 minutes. I mean, kind of exactly what we were talking about. 20 minutes incline treadmill 5 days a week, and he had a resting heart rate. I think he had a physical, and the doctor thought something was wrong. Like, your resting heart rate's 48, and he's like, yeah, I just been doing a lot of cardio. Mm-hmm. And coincidentally, he had the best total he had ever had was when he had the best conditioning. So again, it's anecdotal. It's not like we got a hard peer-reviewed study on this, but this stuff is important. I think what happens real time and in the trenches is just as valuable as anything else. And a lot of the stuff that we see in studies has already been confirmed. Like we already knew that how long you should rest between sets. We already knew that there is potential interference when you do a 5K run, time trial, and also a max clean and jerk in the same session. Like there is going to be interference between those 2 modalities.
Yeah. My first touch point with Conjugate was, I'm sure you're familiar with Charlie Weingroff.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So he did this whole thing at a Perform Better summit about, the
He's married to Allie Gilbert, I think. Yeah. She's like the queen. She's the queen of men's health.
Yeah. I know who she is. I don't know if
she's really funny.
I don't know if they're married or not, but I don't know who he's in a relationship with, but I think he did a whole thing on the interference effect and separating. You need both, but you shouldn't do them in the same session. So it's interesting to hear this all come back years later.
I have people. I just did a post on this not that long ago on the interference effect. I actually, on my shorts on YouTube, I still have people commenting on it saying it's complete bullshit. And I even showed them a study, and it's still bullshit. And people don't want to believe that you can't. It's not that you can't. You shouldn't do those things. And I think that when you train for strength and you go hard and you push the limits and you are really true to yourself in terms of reps in the tank, that's taxing in and of itself. That it requires a level of dedication. It also requires a level of fitness and awareness in terms of what you can do. That alone, I don't know about you, but when I get through 3 or 4 exercises in my session, I'm usually pretty smoked. I don't do 12 exercises. I do 4 to 6 exercises max, and I am out. And I am, after 4 exercises, I'm usually like ready to just do some of the stuff that you give me. Some leg lowering. Yeah. I got nothing left after that. It's like, I'm going to do Dr. Brett exercises, and that'll be it for today. You
might want to start with those actually, but
I usually do actually. I start with a leg lowering in my warm-up sequence.
Great. And then something else too that I've always found interesting is I always thought for sure if I was going to lose weight, I needed to do cardio. Now, a lot of the science out there says, no, that's not true. Just if you're in a caloric deficit, you lose weight, this and that. Turns out I ended up getting genetic testing for some health stuff, and I have a gene that says like I'm not really going to lose weight unless I'm doing a significant amount of cardio. Which I didn't even know was
it. MTHFR?
No, I do have that gene too.
So do I.
I think MTHFR is about B vitamins being premethylated.
Yeah, exactly.
So
We're not good at detoxing either.
Yeah. So I don't know if that has to do with the cardio aspect, but if it is, tell me more about it.
I wish I knew. I'm going to have to look into that because it's funny. My wife and myself both have that. And, we're poor methylators, detox abilities are not great. Again, aerobically, I don't know if there's a connection between the two. There could be, but that's definitely a tougher one to find information on.
Yeah. And yeah, it's kind of new, but that's actually something interesting. My doctor did put me on like a premethylated B vitamin, and it made such a difference to my energy levels because I was taking a regular B vitamin, and I was like, I don't think this is doing anything. Took the other one, I was like, oh, okay, you can feel this like almost immediately. So definitely I can send you mine too if you haven't tried it. But do you think people need to do cardio to lose weight, or is it even that zone 2 cardio, is it gonna help lose weight?
So I think that number one, cardio should be used for heart health. That's what it is. The root of it's cardio. It should be used for heart health. Your losing weight is all about your being in a caloric deficit.
Okay.
And I think strength training is a better way to improve insulin resistance, to improve obviously lean tissue, and of course your metabolism, and obviously the downstream effects of being stronger. So I am a big believer in strength training for again, improving body composition, cardio for heart health, and being in a caloric deficit. Now, if you're doing 60 minutes, when I would do 60 minutes of zone 2, I would usually burn about 700 calories extra. During that time, I was in a deficit. This was over the summer. I was in a deficit anyway, as I was trying to lose adipose tissue, and I did. And of course, did that have an impact? I'm sure it did. But the goal wasn't never to burn the most amount of calories. I could have done intervals and burned more calories.
Yeah.
Right. If I did, imagine doing 60 minutes of intervals, like I would have burned more calories for sure. But the goal was not that. The goal is heart health. So I think keeping the goal is important. And, being real, I think nutrition and sleep, again, it's not usually the things I talk about, but I mean, those are the things. Not eating like an asshole on the weekend, those are the things. It's not, people want to overanalyze, or they want to like take a probiotic, or they want to like have there's no magic solution other than like getting your diet compliant, being compliant 80 to 90% of the time with what you should be eating, and having that be kind of the mainstay in whatever, if you're trying to like get in shape for an event, or maybe it's just get in shape for the summer, you've got to commit to that, and you've got to stay with it, because usually what happens is people get a little bit into it and it's too much of a change, or that maybe they get, they're trying to like kitchen sink it where they're doing everything at once, and it's not sustainable. I think that you've got to commit to the nutrition. I know the one thing that's changed for me as I've gotten older is eating on the weekends just seems to get harder and harder and harder. Like I'm good Monday through Friday. The weekends for me, I know it's funny. This past summer is the leanest I've been since my 20s. And the only thing I attribute that to is cleaning up my diet on the weekend and being like eating my regular meals for the most part. And then if I want to have a cheat meal, it's like kind of, fits in a little bit more than opposed to just eating, cheating the entire weekend, which is what I would normally do. Just the whole weekend is eat whatever I want. And then the other thing for me, Brett, was I bought a Ninja Creamy, free plug to those guys, because I have a sugar addiction, and I would have Ninja Creamy ice cream. I have it after every workout. It's super easy to make. I put protein in it. Yes, I put maple syrup in it for the sweetness. And I have that every day after I work out. It tastes exactly like soft serve, vanilla soft serve. And it has been, I would say, probably the thing that has been able to sustain me throughout the weekend to not like binge on sugar.
I have a friend that's been trying to sell me on a Ninja Creamy, so.
Oh, you can. I mean, if you're like me and sugar is a thing that can derail you.
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile.
Interesting. So anyways, off of that, back to programming here.
I never thought I would get on your podcast and talk about ice cream, but here we are.
Here we are. What is your thought on what is the ultimate training split? Is it a total body split? I know you talk a lot about that. Versus what's the difference between, or why should someone choose total body versus upper lower? Or any other?
Full body training is the ultimate split. And here's why. It spans both beginner, intermediate, and advanced trainees. So if you're advanced, you can put a lot into those sessions and not be sore because you're training your movements spread out across a week as opposed to like doing a leg day or an upper body day. A typical conjugate split, the classic split was doing 2 lower sessions, 1 heavy, 1 speed, and doing 2 upper sessions, 1 heavy, 1 speed. I still use that split for some of my training subscriptions, but the main one, my most popular one, is a full body split, and that's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, full body training. And it allows people that are advanced to push really hard and not be overly sore. Like I do full body training now exclusively, and I never thought I would be one that would convert to this, but I did 2 years ago, and I push harder in each session because I'm never sore. So I have a lot less aches and pains now. I mean, you just looked at my thing. The last time I saw you was like a year ago. So if I was doing classic conjugate, I would be seeing you more often. Mm-hmm. It's more taxing on the joints. It's more taxing on the body. And of course, if you are lifting, maximally, there is a trade-off between doing that. So I think full body spans levels in terms of your ability very well. It's really great for a beginner because they need exposure to your squat, your hip hinge, your lunge, your push, your pull. They need to get better. They need to improve motor patterns. So for motor learning, it's great. For advanced, it's great. Even for intermediate, I think it's great. For a lot of the same reasons, but it also allows us to do the most with the shortest amount of time. So in 3 days, we can cover all our bases. If you're someone that has a variable schedule and you miss sessions, if you miss a leg day, you miss a leg day. That's a big thing to miss. If you miss a full body session, you've got 2 more right behind it. Mm-hmm. Right? So you're hitting your squat, your single leg, your hip hinge, your lunge, whatever variations you choose for your foundational, your 6 foundational movement patterns, you're going to be able to hit those in the next session. So that's a great benefit of it, just in terms of scheduling. In terms of just novelty and kind of fun, it's a lot of fun to do that style of training. Now, I think the trade-off is that you don't feel the same way. Physiologically, you don't get the same muscle pump. You don't feel as broken down. You don't feel as sore. You're definitely not going to have the same level of delayed onset muscle soreness, but that's an advantage. We know that soreness is not a good indicator of efficacy. It's a good indicator of soreness, which takes away from hypertrophy. All research on that points to less soreness, better for muscular hypertrophy.
Really?
People used to think that delayed onset muscle soreness or muscle damage was a key tenet of gaining, breaking down tissue and remodeling. No. And one of the foremost authorities on hypertrophy training has proven that to be true over and over. His name's Brad Schoenfeld.
Yeah.
He's one of the guys on hypertrophy. And he's got a great book on it. But needless to say, the biggest driver for hypertrophy is tension, mechanical tension. So it's not breakdown, it's not muscle damage. So if you're overly sore, you will get less results if you're not. And that's just one of the things I see. It's funny, I just had a guy in our training that just did his DEXA scan. He was on my classic conjugate plan, which is a lower upper. And he added 8 pounds of lean tissue by switching to full body. And anyone will say full body's not enough. Oh, I get people all the time, it's not enough, it's not enough. And the question is whether or not you're putting in the effort. It might not be enough. If you do an exercise and you have 6-7 reps in the tank, then it won't be enough. You have to be true with how many reps in reserve you have, which is, again, 1 to 2, maybe 3 reps for some things, where you're really, really pushing close to your threshold. That's a key element of it. So I think it's a great system for people that have that awareness. But as far as like, if I was to run into 10 people on the street, 8 of them would be a good fit for full body training, and maybe 2 of them would be a good fit for a body part split.
Yeah. And so, looking at goals, who would be better for that split?
For full body?
To do like an upper lower split or push pull split or something like that.
Someone that more concerned about strength and performance, Of course, the volume on that split is higher. So just by virtue, you're doing 2 sessions, 2 lower, 2 upper. So the volume is higher. But sometimes the volume being higher isn't necessarily better. More isn't always more. And if it was that simple, more was more, we could just all not have to even use a training program. We just do whatever we want and just do a lot of it, and we'll get better. But unfortunately, like, there is a point of diminishing returns. So I find that quality is always better than quantity. And that's why full body for me, someone with a higher training age, works a lot better. I go into my sessions and I'm ready to push. And I've got enough time to recover before I do that again. I'm almost never overly sore anymore, which, again, that's kind of one of the trade-offs. So I think if you're more concerned with strength and performance, the upper lower split, you got a lot more freedom to focus on those qualities, as opposed to full body is more towards longevity. And again, I've gotten the best shape of my life on full body training, and that, in comparison to doing an upper lower split, I've gotten more from this. Now, admittedly, I'm not as strong as I used to be. I'm not moving the same weights, but it's not a priority for me anymore. I can, if I can bench 300 pounds, 315 pounds, I'm happy. And beyond that, the question is, like, how strong do I need to be? I'm 41. I'm a dad. I just want to be strong enough to protect my family. That's really about it,
Yeah. And so, yeah, with full body splits, like, what goals can that fulfill for people? Can it get people stronger? Can it get them leaner? Can it get them faster, more athletic? Like, what is your stance on that?
Yeah, all of the above. It all depends on how it's designed. If your goal was to get, maybe you want to improve a specific quality, you can do that on a full body split. You can improve your Olympic lifts on a full body split. It's all what you're prioritizing within that exercise selection. I think if your goal is, to just have the best all around, because again, with full body, you have the ability to do other things when you're not doing full body training, like aerobic conditioning. If you're doing an upper lower split, or you're doing a body part split, where does that other stuff fit? And if you have an unlimited amount of time, then obviously you're the outlier. I don't think that's the case for the thousands of people I've come across in the last few years. Like, most people have very limited in terms of their bandwidth, and they need something that's very concise. But if you have, an unlimited amount of time, then that's a different story. But I think within the confines of that split, you can do a lot of things like manage recovery, and you can put that same emphasis on your aerobic conditioning and your recovery as you do the strength training. So again, people get better results because they're able to do that outside of those sessions. They're able to commit to things that actually are probably moving the needle. The aerobic stuff moves the needle more than anything else. I see people that are just chronically stressed out from time and time again, and it's like, listen, if you're living in fight or flight, then we should probably do some things to get you out of that.
Absolutely. And another question I had, actually, going back to that cardio aspect of, if you had to, or what is the least of, could I do some like speed work and explosiveness training with my cardio day, where like it's not as metabolically taxing to do the high neurologically involved stuff
to start your session?
Yeah, like do some like med ball tosses, jumps, whatever, and then do my cardio after that. Would that be like the least negative contamination?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to put it. I think you can. I do plyometrics 5 days a week, and we're talking like low volume. If you kind of microdose plyometrics, like 3 sets of 3 for 5 sessions, and it's 45 reps a week. You can do that to prime the nervous system for, again, a cardio day. Do you need post-activation potentiation? Probably not, no. But it can be a tool. It can be something that you use. I mean, we know that, type 2 muscle fiber degrades with age. So I do use it every day, and I might even do some other things within that session. So if I'm doing cyclical, like air bike, air runner, rower, skier, that type of thing, I might have like a running clock, and I might, stop doing those pieces every 10 to 15 minutes. And I might do a couple get-ups, a couple Turkish get-ups. I might do a couple body weight movements. Again, it breaks up that time. You can inject things like some kettlebell work or some light loaded carries. You just want things that don't drive a lot of a high level of contraction. That's going to drive blood pressure up. So you wouldn't want to do like a trap bar farmer carry where you're, bracing and carrying something heavy. You'd want to do like a single arm front rack carry with like a light kettlebell or a Turkish get up or an air squat or a push up, something that's just kind of innocuous and doesn't really interfere with what we're trying to do. But mentally, it's a lot easier to do a session that's made up of a lot of different things versus just doing 60 minutes on the treadmill. So I just find ways, I get good at finding ways to trick people into doing the stuff that I want them to do. They don't know that out of 60 minutes or 45 minutes, they're spending 35 of it on a cardio piece. They know that it looks like a training session. It resembles a training session. And they're going to do some other things on that day that help break it up.
Yeah. And one of the big things we've talked about before that I think most people need to hear is, why is less more?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me. That's a good one. I mean, there is so much that you can do if you put in the effort. And I always see, the rep scheme, three sets of 8 to 10 reps or 3 sets of 10 gets kind of demonized. So it's a lazy rep scheme. And actually, it's not a lazy rep scheme at all if it's used properly. And if you put the effort in, if you do 3 sets of 8 to 10 reps or 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps for like a chin up, and you're near failure, that's a really good rep scheme for a movement. Someone that's got, they can handle that volume with a chin up, which 30 total reps is a fair amount of volume for a chin up pattern, then they can get a lot from that. Now, if you're doing 5 sets and maybe you're leaving, some room, maybe you're using a band for assistance and you're kind of just going through it. That's a different story. That leaves a lot more room for being closer to failure. Being closer to failure is going to elicit the most gains in hypertrophy. It's going to elicit the most gains in strength. And I think that the question is can you do that? How many sets can you do that for? Can you do that? Can you do max intensity, like with 1 rep in the tank for, let's say, a front squat, and do that for 5, 6, 7, 8 sets? If you can, then you didn't do it right. Yeah. So again, the question is whether or not you're putting in the effort. And I always ask people, I see these programs when I do the program reviews. I'm like, I just saw one. It was like just an insane amount of volume. And it was like at the end of the session, they were doing 5 sets of 20 dips, 5 sets of 20. So that's 100 reps, right? 100 reps of a dip pattern. So I don't know who you are or what, but I don't know many people that could do 100 dips after 9 exercises that all tax the shoulder joint and the triceps. So
give them my business card.
Right. Give them your business card, because again, like if you can do that, then there's probably maybe you weren't putting in the effort, because I will tell you, if you put in the effort, you're going to be pretty well smoked after doing, again, 4 or 5 exercises. You're probably going to feel like, all right, I got a really, really good training session. So I think people just aren't being true to themselves. If they do a lat pull down and there's 3 sets of 12 to 15 reps, it's like they could probably get 25 reps with that weight they used.
Yeah, that's not a.
Is it a true 12 to 15 like RM? Probably not. And if you follow that methodology where you are being true to yourself with how many reps you have in the tank, see how many sets you can do. Because I'm telling you right now, you'll do 3 sets of 12 to 15 at let's say a 16 RM, and you'll go to your 4th set and you'll get like 5 reps. You'll be completely smoked, and there'll be no more room to do any more of that exercise. It'll be time to move on. And that's kind of the true test, I think, for a lot of people is, are they being true with what they're putting in? And when you're being true, that's where everything changes and where the real magic happens.
And so kind of what you're saying, so some of our results come from like the effort and intensity we put into it. So essentially what you're saying is, for someone to interpret, I guess, is 3 sets of 5 where you put it all out there and it's like, fuck, I really don't want to have to do a 4th or 5th set. You can get more out of that by pushing it to that like 8 or 9 out of 10 intensity than you do in 5 sets of 5 at like a 7.
I think based on, unless you're trying to do a 5x5 at like a set percentage, like 5x5 at 75%, that's plenty of reps in the tank, right? But what is the goal of it? Is it maximal speed? Are you working on bar velocity? So I think as long as whatever is the intent of that training,
yeah.
If you're doing a 5 rep max, then that's the training, right? The intent is to build to the most load you can do 5 repetitions with. If you're doing 3 work sets, which you got to differentiate for this stuff. You have to say it in your training. Your accessory exercises should be 1 to 2 reps in the tank across the work sets. That's why most of my accessory exercises, we don't do more than 3 sets.
Yeah.
Because I'm expecting that people are being true to themselves. Now, again, if they're not, then are they going to get the most from it? Maybe, but for how long is another question. So I think that the intent has to align with what people are doing. And if it's speed work, then obviously that's we might do 5x5 or 8 sets of 3. If it's a 5 RM, it might be 5x5 where we're building to a 5 rep max. So there's certainly some gray area there. It has to be there has to be some description of what the expectation is.
Yeah. And I know you got to go soon, but you got a few more minutes?
I do.
The last thing I wanted to talk about is you do a lot of these program reviews that have become very popular. So I wanted to know, who are some of the biggest names out there? And maybe you don't want to put that out on here, but I think you have on your YouTube anyways, yeah. Of the most popular yet worst programs you've seen out there, and maybe some of the reasons why.
Yeah. That's a good one. So Nick Bear, definitely one of the worst programs. Probably, I would say he's probably...
Is that BPN guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, his is probably one of the worst programs I've seen. I've seen some really, really bad ones. There's a guy, Eric Hinman, who you've probably seen in ads. He endorses every single supplement and every single product that is involved with fitness, saunas, cold plunge. You've probably seen him in paid ads. He has a program, which is a negligent program. If anyone listening, you do his program, I feel for you, because it's probably one of the most negligent programs I've ever seen in my entire life. And that was actually one of the first reviews I did. So it's probably over a year ago now. But Nick Bear, I reviewed his program twice, and just a lot of volume, an insane amount of volume. 5 to 7 miles of running per day. It's a hybrid program. And I think that hybrid, people that are proponents of hybrid training, which hybrid training is, it's what I do. It's concurrent training. You're training multiple qualities of fitness. I think the world right now thinks that hybrid is running and lifting, which is fine. I guess if you want to get granular with it, you could say that it's just running and lifting. His is a running and lifting program, and it's the worst combination of running and lifting you could do, because it's a body part split. So you're going to completely annihilate your legs, and you're going to go do a 7-mile run.
Oh,
so it's a terrible program. You guys more than welcome, watch that review. There's the latest one is on there. They're terrible programs. I wouldn't do that program under any circumstances. And I would, again, tell everyone the same thing, just watch the review. And if you want to do the program, that's on you. But that's one of the worst ones. Matt Fraser, who won the CrossFit Games, his program is just a pile of steamy shit. It's not negligent, but it's just a bunch of crap that doesn't make sense. There's just biomechanically stuff that doesn't make sense. There's exercises that don't make sense. I mean, using a 45-pound bumper plate to do a bench press with makes no sense on so many levels. You're limited by your ability to hold a plate, and you're going to get literally no mechanical tension or anything that's going to even elicit any type of hypertrophic response. But there's a lot of just kind of fluff shit in there. This looks like someone that wrote it that just doesn't know anything about programming, which I have seen that with Matt Fraser. I've seen him on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Yeah. I watched him on that podcast, and I was like, I don't know how you're so successful and know so little. He seems like a nice guy, probably a fun dude to hang out with, but the level of intelligence I witnessed on that podcast was so low that I was baffled by how he's gotten so far in CrossFit. And he was a junior American weightlifter too. You don't have to know anything about programming to be good, to have the genes that he has. He picked the right parents. His parents were Olympic athletes too. Yep.
And I think he's got a degree in engineering or something along those lines. So, he hasn't spent any time learning about actual science or you don't even need to learn science. You could just pick up a basic essentials of strength training and conditioning textbook and learn a little bit about energy systems, learn a little bit about, adaptations to strength training, learn about lactic acid. He mentioned that in that podcast. Someone actually asked me, I actually got the most amount of negative comments on that review out of any review I've ever done. I forget how many views it has, probably around 60,000 views now, but there's a lot of negativity on that one. People just, saying I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about. That's perfectly fine. I, expect that stuff. But a lot of people came to his defense, and, again, he was on that podcast talking about lactic acid burn, and anyone that knows anything about muscle physiology will tell you that lactic acid doesn't cause burning sensation in local tissue. Lactic acid can be used as a fuel source. It is connected. Lactate's connected to fatigue, but it's not the sole responsible factor to fatigue. Hydrogen ion buildup and acidity in skeletal muscle is what causes local burning sensation. But again, you don't need to know like muscle physiology to write a good program. I don't think you do, but I do think that if you know absolutely nothing, which he clearly, that program to me just is a complete mess, says that he knows nothing about training. Now, is people getting results on it? People get results on anything.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the programs that have come out over the years. People get results on anything. But for how long? I don't know how long anyone can do that program for. He's got a huge audience, so that factors into, if you have a huge audience, you're not in the business of keeping people long-term. You can just have turnover, and it doesn't matter. But that's not the business. I'm in the business of getting people results for life. And, people that use my programs, I've had some of the same people using my training for 7 years now. And, they know what they're getting. So I would say those two stand out. Eric Hinman, why was that? That's like that just made me, that review just made me angry.
What happened? What was wrong? What was so negligent about it?
It was just an insane amount of everything, like made up rest intervals. It was like rest 43 seconds between your sets. And, he was asking you to just do things that were just asinine. And I remember specifically, it was just, again, a hodgepodge of steamy shit for a 2-hour training session, and that was like 6 days a week, and just bad, just very, very bad.
That sounds it.
Yeah.
I think that is...
I actually just dropped a couple new ones recently. The Playbook app, you can get a lot of influencer programs. Anyone listening, just don't go on the Playbook app and get your programming. Please don't.
Is that like all influencers on there or something?
Yeah, it's for the most part bullshit. I've seen a couple like okay programs in there. I try to be as fair as possible and not play to my own biases, but sometimes if they're negligent, I'm just gonna completely go haywire on you. It's funny, Tony behind the camera, it's always funny seeing his face when I say some of the stuff that I'm seeing, and he's like, what the fuck is going on here?
And so who are the big, or for people out there that want to learn more about programming, where would you tell them to start with picking up a book, people to follow that are putting out, information on the stuff, much like yourself?
So I think probably one of the best things you can do is Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning. That's a CSCS textbook. That's a great text. I mean, I read it in like 2014 is when I got my CSCS, but it's a great textbook where, again, if you want to learn some basic science, bioenergetics, you want to learn about plyometrics and how plyometrics work. I mean, there's a lot of great information in there. I think Periodization, another great book. There's a bunch of editions of that. I have a video on this on my top resources for books, which I can give you guys. It's got a list of them. Science and Practice of Strength Training. That's another great one. But I think overall for programming, it's a tough one. That's why, I think that's why I do what I do, because it's hard. I think the main thing with programming is doing it and practicing it. They don't teach it even at the highest level. I mean, I'm in a PhD program right now. They don't teach a lot on program design. Even in a master's program, I didn't get a lot on it. I got a lot on program design by doing it and practicing it myself. And, I don't think you can really make that up. I do have a resource I sell called the Ultimate Training Template Handbook, which basically puts together all the fundamentals of programming and gives you all the templates to plug in what you would want to do with a specific scenario. That stuff is certainly viable, but I've got a lot of different stuff on my YouTube channel, like doing whiteboard programming lessons, how to write full body programming. That's a lesson. How to write a conjugate split. That's a lesson or a video on there. And at the end of the day, you can know everything and still not know how to write a great program. So I think get on a program that is a good program and learn from someone else is a great place, because then you're doing it yourself, you're feeling it. And by feeling it, you get a better awareness of what works and what doesn't. And I will tell you, like, even that textbook I mentioned, some of the programs in there are probably not programs you want to try. They're, kind of not unrealistic, some of them, but doing it and getting on a program is from someone you know and respect is a great place to learn a lot about program design and get kind of an intimate knowledge of how that stuff plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still, every time I program for someone, I'm learning new things. So there's programming's so hard of like, there always could be something better. It could always be worse. There's so many variables of this human's life that, how is their sleep, their stress, their hydration, nutrition, whatever. So it's always this big, like, we think it's working, but we're not sure. And yeah, there's so many different ways to do it that I've always found, learning more about principles, this and that, and kind of plugging them in and seeing how they fit with this person. And then, some people, they might fit great. Others, they might need the total opposite. And it's finding who each thing works
and I think I think for most people, they rely on what worked for them when they were in their 20s.
Yep.
And, if you were in your 20s and now you're in your 40s, what worked for you in your 20s might be the polar opposite of what you need now.
Yeah.
The thing that got you to where you're at might not be the thing that gets you to where you want to go. So I think being able to be receptive towards that and honest, hey, I can't do a body part split anymore. I've only got 4 days a week to train. You've got to go to a split that matches your availability. It matches your needs. It matches your goals. And obviously, there are other things that, like injury history and things that maybe you want to avoid that don't align with you anymore. But those are things that you've got to take inventory on and start taking action on. And if you don't, then you just kind of get in this cycle of hopping from programs or getting injured and, being further away from where you actually want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, staying consistent is definitely something more people need to do.
Sure.
But we will wrap this thing up here since I know you got to go and I got to get going too. Jason, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can head to my website. It's jasonbrowncoaching.com. Everything is on my website. My YouTube channel is on there. You can subscribe to me or follow me on Instagram, Jason Brown Coaching, for everything. And I'm happy to support anyone that's listening who wants to know more or more information about this stuff. It's all on my channels. It's all free, so feel free to take advantage of it.
I think I'm going to sign up for your programming now, and I'll do my own YouTube review of it.
Oh, I like it. Let's go.
We'll see how much ice cream and creamy I eat on the weekends. Measure our weight loss.
Oh, that's a game changer.
All right, man. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And anything else you wanted to add?
No, results are king. So let's get to work, people. Be consistent. Don't overthink it. Overthinking is the real gains killer. So don't overthink. Hire a professional and, commit to whatever that goal is.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, man. And hope you all enjoyed today. So thanks for listening.
All right, brother. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
84% of you that listen to this podcast frequently do not hit the follow button. If you've enjoyed any of these episodes, could you do us a favor and hit the follow button, leave a rating, and maybe leave us a review? It helps this channel more than you know, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests get. If you'd like to know more about training in person or online with Brett's Gym, Architect Fitness, please follow us on social at ARKITECT Fitness on Instagram or visit ARKITECTFitness.com. Or if you want to rehab with Barbell Therapy online or in person, check out @barbell.therapy or visit barbelltherapyandperformance.com. Thank you for taking the time to listen.